So good morning, everyone. My name is Jane Bright, and I am co-president of the Whatcom Women's, and I'm trying to admit somebody, Whatcom County Women's Democratic Group, and with Catherine Chambers, who's also here, and want to do a special thank you to Carol Dukes, who really got this whole program going. We are recording it because we knew right from the get-go that with so much going on right now that this would be, having a recording, this would be the best way to get this information out, which is so crucial right now. For those of you who just joined, I was saying that I'm really sort of third generation of dealing with childcare issues, where I was a latchkey kid. I was paying the equivalent of a second mortgage when my kids were little in the 70s and 80s, and now I'm grandma. I do backup coverage. We moved across country to be here to be backup childcare for my son and his kids. So this is not a new problem, and yet the pandemic has really made it obvious of how crucial childcare is to the economic health of the country, to the well-being of our children, and the role that public schools play with kids over age 5 who still need care. So we have a terrific group of people this morning who'll be talking about the issue, and particularly what is going on in Whatcom County. And I'm delighted to say that there's a lot going on. Is it enough? Well, that's something that I think we're going to have to, we'll have to see. So I'm going to let all our folks introduce themselves, and we're going to be starting with David Webster, and I'll let you, David, explain who you are and what you do. And David's got some slides, so we may be doing, hopefully David will be able to share his screen. If not, I will jump in.
Great. So I should do introduction and roll right in then to the slides?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thanks to the Whatcom Democratic Women for raising this chronic issue one more time in terms of how our community is dealing with this. I am going to take about 10 minutes at the invitation of the group to sort of set the stage and give you the latest data on our county, and then leave it to the other experts on the panel to come up with all the magical solutions. Are you able to see the screen?
Yes. And if I could just interrupt for a second, for people who are attending, if you put your view on speaker view, you'll get the best view of all this.
So I am David Webster. I'm the Director of Early Learning and Family Services for the Opportunity Council. And we have a large early learning department that runs many programs and provides many services, including a whole division dedicated to quality childcare. We see the issue from a variety of different perspectives, and I'm just going to kind of walk you through some of them this morning. You'll note that, oh, why are my slides not advancing? There we go, just a little delayed. We call it early learning and care because we no longer distinguish between childcare and formal early learning programs. There always used to be sort of this dichotomy. And we know that the brain science that has been done in the last 2 decades clearly points to the fact that every environment a young child is in needs to stimulate their social emotional development, their school readiness, paying attention to their nutrition and other things so that they maximize their potential. They arrive at the K-12 system equally prepared with their peers and ready to go. So it's not just childcare, and we certainly don't say daycare anymore because we don't care for days, we care for children. And so now we're really focusing on early learning, regardless of the setting, whether it's staying home with the birth parent, whether it's being in a licensed childcare, whether it's being home with grandma. We want every child, regardless of their path, to get to the kindergarten door equally ready. We also know that this is, as has already been in a preliminary discussion this morning, bigger than just the child, because we know that if we don't have a robust childcare system, we are in fact postponing gender equity in our community, in the state, and in this nation, because even though there have been some steps forward in terms of men being involved in caring for children, whenever the crunch hits a family, it is disproportionately the female who leaves the workforce, postpones career steps, turns down a promotion, to solve the family's childcare crisis. And so we can tackle several of our social challenges, I think, by making our childcare system stronger and better. Under current conditions, the way it is financed, it also is contributing to stubborn poverty in our nation, both for families who are paying incredible sums to put their children into childcare, but also to those who take it as their mission to provide childcare or early learning. They are just not making enough money to sometimes bring their own families out of poverty. So it's kind of a double-edged sword in that regard. We know that, and I'm sure Guy will talk about this later, that businesses are starting to feel the pinch. And so it's potentially contributing to some stagnation in our economy when they can't get people to move here to take jobs because there's no childcare for their infant, or quality employees can't take on more hours or more responsibilities because they can't balance it with their childbearing needs. And we also know that for a variety of reasons, not having a solid childcare market has disparate impacts on children, families, communities of color, because they are already lagging oftentimes in other indicators of economic health. And of course, since March, we know that being a childcare provider can literally be a life or death occupational choice. Many of the providers you're going to hear from this morning have been open throughout the pandemic, serving essential workers in other fields. And never before has the critical nature of childcare services been so prominent in everyone's consciousness, especially as the schools have postponed opening and all those school-age children had to be cared for somewhere. So just a quick couple of definitions so that hopefully my comments will make sense as I work through these slides. I already talked about, we're talking about early learning and care in one system with common goals. Much of it is based on the brain science that the University of Washington and many other higher ed institutions have done in the last 2 decades about what we have to do to maximize the potential of children. Everyone talks about, is there enough childcare capacity? And capacity is a difficult thing to measure, not quite as straightforward as you would think. Many places, if they're a licensed site, are licensed for a certain number of children, but often choose not to enroll that many children. So it can lead to sort of a false snapshot of how much childcare capacity is there in Whatcom, because it's usually the licensed number that gets reported, but in fact, those businesses may not be serving that number of children. And we have a variety of settings that do early learning and care, and I'm going to walk you through those on the next slide, with varying degrees of regulation, various degrees of information so that a parent can be an informed consumer before they decide to put their child into a program. And that's one of the other things that we're really trying to work on this stage, is to make sure parents have enough information to make decisions that they feel are best for their children. I have some numbers for what has been projected as an unmet need in our county, but I'm looking forward to an upcoming study that we supported and others did, that the United Way went after some Washington Department of Commerce dollars to do a very specific supply and demand analysis of Whatcom County, where we're going to try to drill down and be able to identify the real delta between supply and demand, school district by school district in this county. So that's going to be a study that's going on in the next year. And we really look forward to finding out more specifically how much we need, where it needs to be, and who needs it most through that upcoming study. And I also think it's important, I'm going to talk a little bit about subsidized care, and Washington is actually a leader in some ways in terms of how we support low-income families and getting subsidy for their children's care. But we are also a state that still has some hiccups in that We have progress penalties. So if you get a small raise at work, suddenly you can see a very big jump in your co-payments that you have to make for your subsidized care. And oftentimes that too leads to women saying, I'm not going to take that promotion or even that raise because it's more costly for me to lose the childcare subsidy than what I gain in that wage increase. So it's kind of some really tough economic decisions mostly women are put into. So as I mentioned, there are a lot of different settings in which early learning and care happen. I'm going to start on the left and kind of work off of that. Most people, when they think of it, oftentimes think of licensed centers. Those are the most prominent ones and usually where the largest capacity is. Prior to the pandemic in our county, we had licensed centers that served as few as 8 and as many as 532 children across multiple sites. And that Heather's going to be on, I think, this morning, and she can talk a little bit about an update because that was the Kids World transition. The Boys and Girls Club took over earlier this year and how they're moving forward with the capacity there. There are significant numbers of licensed centers, but there are more licensed family homes. And this is where a person chooses to have their home regulated to provide care for children with official designation by the state of Washington. Most of them serve between 1 and 8 children. They can go up to as many as 12, depending on how large their home is. Again, those are oftentimes difficult to measure because it also depends on the age of the children they're serving. They may be licensed for 8, but if they take 2 infants, then they have to take fewer older children because of the challenges of a sole proprietor trying to care for children with, obviously, infants are not mobile, so there's all sorts of safety things that have to be taken care of, and so they don't want to limit the older children in those settings if there are infants or toddlers being cared for. So that's another example of where they, on the books, it may say they're licensed for 8 or 12, but this month they might only be able to serve 4 or 5 because of the age of the children that they're serving. We do have in this state a state-funded preschool called ECAP, as well as the federal program Head Start. Those are free programs that serve 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds. When Head Start began 55 years ago, it was a couple days a week, a couple hours a day social development program. That is no longer the case. It is now more and more trying to parallel at least the elementary school day hours for those young children. So families have sort of a consistent pattern with their children. And we also have in the state preschool program, workday slots, as they are called, which can be up to 10 hours of programming so that working families have coverage. Now, those are great programs. I say with a bias because we operate them. But the other thing that's important to know about them is that you have to be of really low income to qualify. So we're talking at the federal poverty level, maybe as much as 110% of the federal poverty level in order to be eligible. So it leaves out many families that are working but not making enough to really pay the open rates of childcare and yet not qualify for the free program that the federal or the state government offers. And the United Way refers to those families as ALICE families, and that they are asset limited, income constrained, but working. So it's the working poor that make just a little too much to qualify for the free programs, but not nearly enough to be able to afford the real cost of childcare.
David, we only have a couple more minutes. So.
Yeah, great. And therefore there we get to a variety of home visiting programs, what school districts offer. Obviously homeschooling is a big force in Whatcom County. During the pandemic, there have been all sorts of parent innovations around pods and other ways for them to care for each other's children in a collaborative way, which has been around for generations. We have some before and after school programs that are licensed, others that are not, some that are indoor, some that are outdoor. We do have some growth in the private sector of companies allowing women to bring infants to work, which is a help because infant care is typically a chronic shortage here and around the nation. But it does lead to, even despite all these programs, one estimate of a shortage of 4,400 spaces for birth to 5 children, and even more than that if you're talking going up to the age of 12 or whenever a family decides a child is able to stay home by his or herself. Just some numbers really quickly. 2,100 or so children born every year in this county, so we know they're coming into the need for care potentially. Just under half of those are Medicaid eligible births. but it leads to about 23,000 children under the age of 10. And it's obviously a family and child maturity decision as to when a child no longer needs to be in somebody's care, but typically you're talking 12 years of age or so before parents start getting comfortable about a child not being in a formal program before or after school or whatever the case might be. And we do know that for children under 12, 60 to 70% of them have all the adults in their household working outside the home. So that becomes the multiplier for which we need to figure out how we're going to provide care. This is data as of this past week. In this county, we currently have 31 open centers that are serving multiple ages with a capacity of just under 1,800 children. We have 34 open licensed homes that serve multiple ages as well, with 350 or so. 25 school age programs that serve 858. We have one outdoor program that serves up to 12 children, for a total of currently 91 providers who are open that are licensed, with a little over 3,000 child capacity. I do note that for a variety of reasons, we, since February, have lost 12 licensed sites in this county, but we've had 3 new ones opened up, and we're working with some others to come here or expand. This was the available capacity this week in Whatcom County. Very unusual. There were 31 infant slots open. Normally there are no infant slots available, but because of the pandemic, because of schools not being in session, as has been mentioned, many women or other parents are staying home and caring for and not needing as much infant care. So right now there are some slots available. Again, growing numbers once you get to the toddlers and the preschoolers and school aged. But once schools resume, I think you're gonna see people going back to work, and that's gonna probably take us back to the deficit position we were in prior to the pandemic. We still have some providers who closed during the pandemic and have yet to reopen. We're hoping they do reopen. We're working with them to support their reopenings. However, during the Great Recession of 07, 08, 30% of the providers who closed temporarily never came back online. So we're really trying to minimize that during this particular scenario. But we do have staff working with all the providers and touching base with them mostly weekly. And right now, 58% of them saying they're experiencing some risk of whether or not they're going to be able to continue to function. So we're paying a lot of attention to stability of the market. I'm not going to go a lot. Everyone knows childcare is expensive. These are a snapshot of recent costs. And the main reason I put this table up here is to pay attention to this difference column out here on the right. And that is what providers who step up by mission to care for low-income children under the subsidy program. This is the deficit they experience every month for every child they serve, depending on the age of the child. So our state just decided to go up to 65% of the full market rate in the subsidy program, but it really means that we need to thank those providers who take subsidized children, because they are taking a financial hit, and most of them, many of them are nonprofits who have to go out and raise additional money just to cover the cost of serving the lowest income children. You've probably seen this diagram before, that depending on the age of your child, it can cost you more to put your infant in childcare for a year than it would cost you to send a child to Western. And that will continue, although the way things are going, for quite some time. So really quickly, my department, we are the regional coordinator for the quality improvement system the state has put in place. So we have coaches and trainers that help out providers. We are also the ones that help update the statewide referral system. So if a parent wants to find care, they just call the family center or go online to the family center. You can get up to the moment data on where there are spaces available for their age of child. We also do emergency childcare vouchers, which is seeing a big spike right now because of the school decisions. So many parents were not planning on having their older children being in paid care for this stretch of time, and it's just blowing budgets out of the water. So we are getting a real upward trend in terms of families coming to us saying, I need some help paying for this childcare. And as I mentioned, we run early Head Start, we run early intervention for children with special needs, we run Head Start, we run ECAP. We spend a lot of time advocating to try to improve the system. And we are, as of this year, partnering with the Regional Chamber on the Northwest Center for Childcare Retention and Expansion, which I'm assuming Guy will talk about. Lastly, here are some numbers that if people want to get a hold of the family center to figure out where care is available, there's the 800 number there. You can also call our child care division for a variety of things. If you want to reach out to the new center that Guy will talk about a little bit, that email at childcarebiz@opco.org will get you to that staff that's working to stabilize and grow the market. And then if you have questions for me, my email is pretty standard address for the Opportunity Council employees. And I'm going to stop there.
Okay, David, thank you. That is some very sobering statistics on that. Next, we asked Alicia Rule to talk a little bit about sort of the emotional side and the mental health side of this dilemma, because we can look at numbers all day long, but there's a real human side to this. So Alicia, if you could please unmute yourself.
Hello, thank you so much for having me today, and thank you, David, for that really thorough rundown. There is not a single piece that you've just presented that hasn't impacted or that I haven't interfaced with, either professionally or personally. I am the mother of 3 children, so childcare is near and dear to my heart, and not just childcare, but quality childcare is critical. And as a lifelong social worker with a pretty tight focus on children, youth, and families, this is an area that I have seen challenges in over decades, really. One of the things we know about having access and options to good childcare and early learning opportunities is it's a protective factor for children. And one of the very first things we can do if we know that a family is at risk is put in good childcare, because it's a good support for the family. So it's not just, often we think about the impact on the children, but children don't exist in a bubble. They exist in a system of family and support. And when we have good quality options for families, they thrive. We value hard work in our community here in Whatcom County, and without good quality childcare that we can rely on, families can't work. So it's almost as simple as that. As a city council person in Blaine, I have been working with the Boys and Girls Club, and I'm happy to support them because we in our community here very much rely on Boys and Girls Club to keep things running smoothly. They're a critical part of our infrastructure here. Additionally, I work now in a private practice setting, and it still is an issue because a lot of times we're dealing with people with shifting family systems and family structures. So that might mean a divorce, or maybe now a grandparent is taking care of a kiddo, and they often weren't planning on this shift to happen. And it's an abrupt change, and people were doing okay until they weren't doing okay. And now if they're looking at an 8-month wait for childcare for their child that they're happily ready to take care of, it really puts them dead in the water for options. So I really strongly believe that we in Whatcom County deserve to have good options. And I think we need to continue to work at all levels. This is not a simple challenge, and it doesn't have simple solutions. So we can't just look at it like one answer, but we've got to look at the multiple pieces that David just laid out for us and come up with some pretty creative solutions that offer variety.
Thank you, Alicia. Let me also mention that Alicia is running for state rep in the 42nd position 2?
Position 1.
Position 1, sorry about that. So thank you. I know you've had a very busy schedule, and we really appreciate you taking the time this morning. Our next speaker is Guy Ochiogrosso, who is president and CEO of the Bellingham Regional Chamber. And I'm delighted to see the business community in this mix, in this conversation. So Guy, if you could unmute yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for putting this together and inviting me. I'm going to keep my comments fairly short, and I'm so glad I didn't have to follow David. So Alicia, my apologies. David is amazing. He's a great resource to this community and this effort. And we started having a dialogue regarding early childhood learning, education, and care probably 5 or 6 years ago. And about 3 years ago is when we really started to focus in on the gaps in local childcare. So one of the interesting things, as you mentioned, Jane, is the business community's response, or at least engagement in this. And this has been going on for about 4 years that I am aware of, through the US Chamber. And I'll post a YouTube link because I don't want to take time away from everyone else in the chat, so people can check that out afterwards. The US Chamber Foundation, so their philanthropic arm, is really engaged in this dialogue, and they produced a great video earlier last month, since it's now October. So as a Chamber of Commerce, most people understand what we are. We're a membership-based organization, kind of glass over our mission is to create a place to live, learn, work, and play, right? Like most people have some kind of understanding of that's what chambers do. For the Bellingham Regional Chamber, we have 4 value pillars that we like to say that's our commitment to our members, and that's advocate, educate, connect, and promote. And childcare, interestingly, doesn't fit into any one of those buckets, but we also have strategic initiatives that we're engaging with. And this is certainly one of those, along with housing, diversity, equity work, transportation. And those are kind of the community issues that are impacting business. And I think David did a really great job, as did Alicia, to describe the pain point that parents, so if we think of our current workforce, this is the pain point that we're feeling now. I would say both from a family scenario, income, the expense of it, availability. But when we look at from the business side, and again, a lot of this was mentioned already, scheduling impacts, choices for job decisions, whether you want to work, whether you can work. The other piece to this that I like to bring up is the future planning piece. Let's think 20, 25 years down the road, is we want quality childcare from an education capacity built into these centers, because we want, a compassionate and thoughtful workforce down the road. We're not going to be teaching children some advanced theories in a childcare setting, but we will be teaching critical thinking skills. We'll be teaching some of those soft skills, the basics of the soft skills. And when we look at employers now, that's one of the reoccurring pain points that we're seeing, is the lack of critical thinking and the lack of ability to work in teams, if you will. And so that's one of the aspects that a quality childcare program, engagement with other kids at a very young age, certainly helps to resolve. And so I guess prior to the pandemic, David and I started having this dialogue on what this expansion center would look like. And we're happy to be a partner. We're happy to house it at the chamber and really connect the dots for the team that'll be serving the center to the business community. And that's really when I look at what our role as a chamber is to attach this effort to, I would say, our machine and our efforts, and plug it into the existing systems that we've created over our 120 years or so of existence as a chamber. And so super excited to have this. It's going to be up front in the office, street side, so people will be able to take note that this is a thing serving our community, and we look forward to developing the partnership further. And I'll be honest, I have it easy. I get to work with David and Willan, and I look forward to engaging with Kenda and Abigail as we go further. And I'll contribute the rest of my time to questions at the end or the other speakers.
Okay. Thank you, Guy. All right. We had Satpal Sidhu scheduled, but I do not see him here. So I don't know whether Guy or David, you could maybe address a little bit about what's going on at the county level. Anybody want?
Sure. There are a couple things going on. There is The County Council approved early this year a child and family action plan that came out of the Generations Forward movement here locally. And South Paul has been supportive of that. Of course, they are wrestling with tough budget times, so there are going to be some difficult choices to be made. But there are a number of action items there that are being looked at. And the county and the city of Bellingham and even the Caucus of Small Cities has been very generous in terms of passing on some of their federal CARES Act dollars to help us stabilize the childcare market. So between the county government and the cities, wave one had up to $800,000 available, and our team at the Northwest Center and Willan's Quality Childcare team helped them get those out to the community of providers. There's talk about a second wave coming that South Paul is supporting as well. And so I think we're getting a good level of engagement there. And we hope that that will be a partnership that will continue to grow as well.
Thank you. Some of the providers have really stepped up, and I really want to recognize and thank them. And then our next two speakers will do that. And I'm delighted to welcome Melinda Yost, who is with the Y. And Melinda, if you could unmute yourself and tell us what's going on at the Y.
Sure, thank you. Can you hear me all right?
If you could turn up your volume a little bit, please.
Is that better?
Not
really. Okay, I'll try to speak loudly and clearly then.
Thank you.
The YMCA has been operating since March. We never stopped for our early learning programs, and for our school age programs, we did stop for a week to make sure that we were doing things appropriately before we jumped into emergency care. Currently, we have adjusted our school age program to meet the needs of children not being in school. We have 4 locations. We're serving approximately 175 children. We are at Cordata Elementary, Happy Valley. We just started at Harmony this last week. That is serving through 6th grade. And then we also have a location in Linden. Our 2 early learning centers are doing great, except we are at about 85% capacity. David is correct in that you actually can't run at 100% capacity, or you wouldn't have any room for an infant to move into a toddler space or a toddler to move into an.
Melinda, can I interrupt? Could you try moving the microphone a little closer to your mouth?
Sure.
Oh, that's so much better. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Is there anything I need to repeat?
I think you're okay. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So we are operating our early learning centers. We have not seen space in those centers in many years, but we do have space now. When we work off of our wait list, families are telling us that they either lost their job or they're staying home to care for and educate their elementary school age child. So they decided to keep their younger one home, or they do not yet feel safe putting a child into a group setting. So at this time, we do have some space in those early learning settings. The Y is also offering at our downtown location availability for access to Wi-Fi. So you can come in with a parent with a reservation and get hooked up to Wi-Fi, free Wi-Fi if you do not have that available.
Can I just ask you a question? Do you need to be a member to use the Wi-Fi?
No, you do not.
Okay.
Not at all. You don't need to be a member to take advantage of any of these programs. In fact, we give our children and the early learning families get a free family membership, and all children get a free youth membership.
Thank you. All right. Should we move on then to Heather Powell with the Boys and Girls Clubs? Heather, if you could unmute, please.
Good morning. Boys and Girls Clubs before COVID traditionally served just over 4,000 youth a year through our programs. In March 1st of 2020, we did acquire the Kids World daycare business. We had heard that Kids World was going to be going out of business and knew that we could not let 532 licensed spots slip away in a community where there was already a childcare shortage. We felt that taking over the Kids World was a great alignment for our mission. Traditionally, Kids World did not limit the number of working connections or subsidized children who participated in its program, and Boys and Girls Clubs has never turned children away. So when we took over Kids World, they were serving an average of 65% of the children that they served were working connection subsidized youth. Since the pandemic, that number has grown to 78%. So if you think back to that table that David showed earlier about the gap between what a parent pays and what the state pays and what has to be made up, we are making up that deficit for 78% of the children that we're serving right now. And our average daily attendance across the 4 Kids World centers is just over 200 children. So 78% of those families are coming to us with a wide variety of needs. And we're working really hard to fill those needs beyond just what they're looking for childcare right now. Times are challenging for many people. And for those who experience poverty, those challenges have been multiplied during COVID. We also, so Boys and Girls Clubs has traditionally focused on school age care. And I was really happy to hear at the front end this idea that we often overlook school age children and what their needs are. We send them to school. School provides kind of that care for them, and then they leave school, and what is available for them is really very limited in some cases. So we have in the past, like I said, filled that gap in the communities that we serve, clubhouses in Blaine, Ferndale, Linden, and Bellingham. We also run a program out in East County that serves about 120 children during non-COVID times as a part of a 21st Century grant. So when children weren't going to return back to school this fall, we recognized that that was going to leave a really big gap for a lot of families. And our team got together and we have developed Project Connect. Project Connect is running in all of our open centers. This includes licensed care at Kids World right now, where we are making sure that kids are connecting to their online school day, and that we are helping them complete all of the assignments that they are supposed to be completing after their synchronous learning, as well as on their off day schedule. It's a complex moving target for us right now. We are working with 5 school districts and managing over 112 unique children's schedules. It's a lot. It's become managing 112 unique schedules for kids who struggle to connect and use Wi-Fi has been a great challenge for us. I'm very proud of how our staff has worked very hard to step up and fill that gap. We also are working closely with the Bellingham School District, who has not deployed devices and therefore not having their kindergarten and first graders connect to synchronous learning, but they are publishing a learning calendar. And so we are giving that calendar to our staff who are working with our K-1 children in our centers, and essentially asking them to become teachers and do the best they can to provide learning in the daycare environment based on what we're being provided. It's not perfect. I'm not going to lie. Our staff is not trained to be teachers. We don't have all of the equipment and resources that a school classroom would have, but we definitely are, making our best go at it. And where we're struggling, we read to kids, because you can never go wrong with sitting down and reading to children. So since March, our business has been turned upside down. We had a business plan for how we would move forward with an acquisition of a totally new business arm. And we kind of threw that plan out the window when a global pandemic hit. But we remain serving children and providing what I feel, as we're talking about today, is a really critical need in this community. And we'll continue to look for how we be a partner moving forward, providing more opportunities for licensed and unlicensed care.
Thank you. 112 unique schedules. I couldn't do two. We are planning to talk more about what's going on at the state and federal level at a subsequent meeting, which we tentatively have scheduled for November 14th, but we may want to push that out a little bit given what's going on. But I see that Sharon Shoemake is here. Sharon, do you want to take a minute and first of all say hello? And is there anything you'd like to add, anything critical that's going on at the state level that you want to pass along right now?
Yeah, so I had a few thoughts. Thank you all for putting together this presentation. David Webster always does a fantastic job. I wish I'd had that when I started the legislature. I had to figure out all those terms on my own. And that graph always cracks me up because the one where they show the cost of childcare and then Western as cheaper, you have to pay me a lot more to deal with 12 3-year-olds than dealing with 70, 18 to 22-year-olds. Like my job's a lot easier. And requires a lot less patience. So I think a lot about the impacts on the workforce, right? So families are passing up employment and switching jobs because of childcare. Sheryl Sandberg's organization just came out with a report the other day that said 1 in 4 women is thinking about stepping down or stepping out of the workforce as a result of this pandemic. And so this isn't just a gender equity thing. It's also a really important economics thing. We see that teams that are diverse perform better, that having women in the boardrooms results in, higher returns, right? That this inclusion, equity, and diversity is just really important to the way we run our businesses, our nonprofits, every factor. I wouldn't have come to Western if there hadn't been women on the faculty. I'll be completely honest. I interviewed with some places that were all old white men, and I was like, that's not where I want to go and move to. So that's really key. At the state level, what we're looking at is we got to figure out the money thing, right? So you saw that we were underfunding. This isn't a desire of will. We have all these wonderful, creative local partners who are doing this incredible work. And we are doing some policy work on licensing innovation, looking at outdoor preschools, looking at ways to allow places that maybe you don't have a whole lot of indoor space, but you have a lot of outdoor space if you're in a rural area especially. So how can we provide some flexibility on the spaces for some of those family centers? But the money. And one proposal that was floated around last year that I think is still going to be worked on by some of the heavy hitters in the legislature is the idea of using a capital gains tax to better fund early learning and childcare as well. So both that preschool aspect and funding the Working Connections childcare. I've always thought that that was something that's fair to do. You think about a capital gains tax, it usually exempts retirement, it exempts agriculture, it exempts small businesses. And typically, there's a lot of levers you can use, but it's usually if you're making more than $100,000 a year, $200,000 for a couple selling stocks, right? And so that's kind of passive income that you're making. That's the community that's really doing a lot of that work. We did some estimates. It would hit very few people in Whatcom County. But I think that when you're making that kind of passive income, that's other people's labor, right? That's other people going out and doing the ideas you have there. And I think it makes a lot of sense to send 7% of that back to funding the next generation. That next generation that is crucial for maintaining our workforce, crucial for maintaining our economic productivity, and ensuring that we have innovation from all sorts of levels, not just the kids that receive this incredible care and this high quality work, but also the moms and the dads who are unable to, follow their dreams if they don't have the safe place to keep their kids. And, grandmothers come in too, right? Like people are upending their lives. And if we want to talk about, sometimes economists have talked about like mobility within the nation, right? And sometimes during the last recession, North Dakota was booming and we couldn't get enough people to move there for jobs, and other places were really struggling. And one reason that people weren't willing to move is childcare. You don't want to be too far away from mom because you need that extra help. And so if we can,
Well, you just froze.
not only but it's also a good economic move as well.
All right, well, thank you. Well, there will be more discussions about what's going on at the state level and the federal level, but thank you, Sharon, for jumping in. I know you've got a campaign that you're running too, so really appreciate you taking the time. We have some questions, and what I'd like you to do, if you have questions for any of our speakers or for all the speakers, probably in the bottom of your screen, you'll see something that says chat. So if you would type in your questions there, that would be helpful. But we did get a couple of questions ahead of time. One, and I will read this to you. Excuse me. I'm a single mom with full custody of my special needs child 100% of the time. Disability is in the approval process, so my child is without additional support, and I have no respite care or child care to support us. I had to take leave from work to support my child with transitioning to the virtual learning model, and my child has an IEP. IEPs are designed to support the child with their special needs and help with support services, but he has been isolated and without any support or friend group since March. My question, how can we find support for our family during this time so my special needs child is not left behind? Not sure who wants to take this one on. Sounds like there are two questions. One is financial, and the other is just where this child could get some help. I don't know the age of the child, but anybody want to address this? David, do you want to maybe address the financial at least?
Sure. It's probably not a huge amount of comfort to this parent, but he or she is not alone. One thing that has, despite the pandemic, one thing that has not changed is that a child with an individualized education plan, which is a federal entitlement, has not stopped. The school district to which that child belongs is supposed to be supporting that child through that, whatever is outlined as goals and supports in that IEP. I know the districts are all struggling to figure out how to do that in a population that is now literally scattered to the wind because they're not in one building. But I would recommend to that parent, to get a hold of the special services director at their child's school district. Another resource locally is the ARC of Whatcom County. They do a lot of work with parents who have children with IEPs or 504, they call them behavior plans. And they're a really good advocate to make sure that rights are upheld. We have begun to add, and Willan, if you're still on the call, you can feel free to chime in. Willan heads our quality childcare division. She is adding both behavioral and mental health specialists to her team because throughout the age span, there is more prevalence now of children needing additional supports and parents consequently also needing those supports. So anything you want to add, Willan?
Hi, I didn't expect to be called on, and I'm in a place where I can't turn my camera on. So I would say that we are seeing this all across the state. And so adding not only an infant early childhood mental health consultant, but developing a team of consultants within our early learning coach teams is something that we are ramping up on a little bit faster than we had anticipated just due to the circumstances right now. And so I would say, working with childcare providers, working with and families working with their early learning coach, that one of the coaches that they happen to be working with through the Opportunity Councils program would be a good way to be supportive of the families too once they do find care.
And Willan, could you introduce yourself, please, and tell us who you are?
Sure. I am, and I apologize. I just said I would be on as a blind no-show person and in a list of a lot of folks. My name is Willan Olila-Perry, and I'm the Senior Manager of the Quality Childcare Division under the Early Learning and Family Services Department. So David is our supervisor, and I head up almost all things childcare out of the Opportunity Council, and have for a number of decades. So.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Another question that came in ahead of time is from a childcare provider. And this person says, I'm the owner and the owner of 3 to 6 teacher at Blue Horizon Montessori, serving children ages 22 months to 6 years. As we are running at half capacity and had to drop our toddler program this year, will there be any more grants allocated to childcares or preschools in Whatcom County to help us stay afloat through COVID? It has been very difficult and expensive to go through the licensing process through DCYF. Are the steps being taken to either make it easier for others to apply and receive their licenses, or at least help them with the incredible costs associated with the training and building improvements that are required? David, I think that's back to you.
You're right. Yes, there will be more grants coming to help, especially because of COVID, but we are also working with the philanthropic community and the private sector to have additional dollars where we can award grants to providers at various stages of need, whether it's because they are interested in becoming licensed or because they're just, I mean, the crazy thing for a lot of providers, including these brave ones who have stepped up and stayed open throughout the pandemic, is that despite a large number of essential workers, many of them ran under capacity. So their expenses were up because their group sizes had to be smaller. They had all the PPE stuff that they had to acquire and all the sanitation work that they had to do. And yet were not always fully enrolled when they made their capacity available. So this Montessori is a microcosm of that bigger issue right now. And that is that the numbers aren't really adding up very well for a lot of providers because they're staying in it for the mission, but financially they're taking a hit because they're doing so. And I think the Northwest Center for Retention and Expansion will have grant dollars that it continues to support providers of various stripes to try to get through some of those challenging times. Hopefully to the point where we get everybody stabilized enough that we can really turn our attention to the original goal, which was to expand the market here in meaningful ways. But for sure, in the coming months, there'll be more CARES Act dollars and hopefully some other ones as well.
Question for Guy. And that is a candid sort of assessment of the business community in terms of their recognition that childcare is a business issue, and businesses saying, even more importantly, not only is it a business issue, but that they're saying, I need to get involved and do something. What's your sense about sort of the awakening, if you will, of the business community?
Oh man, that is a nuanced question. I would say, just as most things, it's on a spectrum, right? One of the things that I like to say is not all business is created equal. I mean, if you have a small business, let's say 1 or 2 person shop that has to do everything, for the most part, even outside of a pandemic, they're just trying to survive. And this also goes back to how it impacts the business is going to really depend upon their reaction, engagement, giving support structure of, I would say, this crisis. So there's no easy answer to that. With that said, that was the basis of the survey that, David, would we do 3 years ago now, something like that? And what we found is it was on the radar for many businesses, particularly those that are in the HR department or hiring managers or supervisors. They're the ones that are seeing this as that pain point of, oh, I don't have reliable staff or labor that come in, because what happens if someone gets sick? What happens if childcare falls through? And I think that's one of the interesting takeaways for this pandemic for me, is how delicate our system really was. I think we like to assume that, oh, we've got hundreds and hundreds of years of development and these nice gears that fit succinctly in together, and we just don't. You have these layers and industries that are, again, just a delicate balance. And you throw a major pandemic in, And then we start seeing the shortfalls of a lot of these systems. And
Have
that's,
you heard any businesses, particularly some of our larger employers, talk about actually setting up either in-house childcare or sponsoring childcare, a
Yes.
childcare business?
Yeah. So one of the, let's say, survey was step one, at least of our engagement. David and Opportunity Council, among many others, have been doing this a long time. Survey was kind of our foray into the dialogue. Step two was this joint running of what we called the North Whatcom County Employer Consortium. I think, David, roughly. I got most of the words in there correct. And that was engaging with a lot of our large capacity employers generally associated or located in North Whatcom County. And so you're looking at Samson Rope and Superfeet, as big as BP and Cherry Point. They're all aware. One of the pain points that we see, and this is stepping over into the economic development world, is we don't have a lot of spaces that are big enough for employers to start expanding, much less add a childcare facility into that. Another nuance to this is if you are, let's say, BP, one of the companies located in our community that probably could do this on their own, like they have enough capital to be able to make it happen, they can't co-locate on site, right, based upon their business. So they would be an entity that would sponsor in or purchase slots or guarantee slots in another facility. We just need to have that other facility. And that's part of the goal, I think, of this expansion center. Is sometimes it will be expanding centers that are already in existence. Sometimes it will be maybe growing into 2 locations for facilities that are there. And sometimes it will be working with our employers to maybe group and co-locate centers that work. So to answer your question, most of our large employers, they're very aware of this, particularly those that have HR professionals.
Right.
And even if you don't, you're probably aware of it. Your capacity to assist depends on the business.
Yeah, I think the question is, how do you get from awareness to action and actually solving the problem? Not to discourage you, but I spent many, many years, decades ago, in human resources, and companies would very often, walk up to the edge and just say, it's complicated, I don't want to do it, and all this stuff. But sort of a follow-up question to that is to both Heather and Melinda, in terms of running these childcare services, do you have any thoughts you'd like to pass along to the business community, or requests, or anything you'd like to say, since we've got here, and also for David? Heather, any thoughts from you on this topic? Let's see, Heather.
While Heather is thinking, Jane, I will tell you, I can't disclose the business, but a large employer here just recently did a survey of their employees, definitely compounded by the pandemic, but it was some chronic need even before that. They're working with us because they're trying to figure out how they have 110 employees who have indicated that they're either going to need to change their hours or leave employment because of childcare. So I think the work that we did with the North County Consortium and others, I think that we do have some members of the business community who are willing to step up and be a part of the solution. And it's going to take a lot of creative ways. We've got a couple of providers that are looking at coming into Whatcom County from other counties. And while they're still a blank slate, we want to work with our existing providers and those new providers to say this is an opportunity for a corporate need to merge with a provider who could have a good chunk of their capacity purchased month after month by that employer. So that's some of the work that the Northwest Center is going to be doing to try to make those deals happen.
Heather?
So we've been operating licensed childcare for 7 months, and all but 2 weeks of it have been during a global pandemic. So I would not say that we have gathered all of the information, or that we could say we are an expert in licensed care at this point. I think that as we were preparing to go out and acquire Kids World, I had a number of conversations with the large businesses to see if they would financially support the acquisition. It was not inexpensive for us, and we continue to have costs associated with that, and will continue to have costs associated with that for many months to come. As well as going to be in a position where we need to do a capital campaign in order to purchase those businesses. We don't own those facilities. We're currently leasing them. So I think that, the cost of providing high quality care is great. There are policy things that if the business community could get behind, in supporting changes that need to happen in order to have high quality care, and not just have it be available, but also have it be affordable. There are many people who could offer high quality care if they could charge whatever they needed to in order to support that. But that's not realistic for the families that need to be served in Whatcom County. The graph that was shown about the cost of childcare is proof of that. So I always look for ways to go to the root and solve the problem, so that we're not putting a Band-Aid on it. And I think that that's going to be around policy with childcare. And there's a lot, we ask a lot of our business community, and they have their own policy initiatives that they're working on. But as this does affect their business through their employees, I think that some rally behind changes could be really beneficial.
Can you give us an example of the kind of change you have in mind?
Reimbursement rates, for start, are a big deal in terms of those who come to us for working, or come to us that are subsidized through Working Connections. Additionally, to kind of go back and address the question about, I have a special needs child. We have a number of children with IEPs in our centers, and the parents are really responsible for doing the work to apply for support, to get one-on-one or additional assistance to come into the childcare centers. And it's a brutal process. And it shouldn't have to be. If a child has an IEP at school and they have a one-on-one aide there, if they need to be provided care outside of school, the process shouldn't be entirely separate for them to get that support. And that we are seeing an increase in the number of children in schools that have IEPs. And parents don't have the capacity or the knowledge for how to work the system to get what their children need. And that's a policy issue that I feel like we should be taking on to help parents and serving kids better.
Okay. All right, you and Sharon will get together, I'm sure. Melinda, you have something to add, please?
Well, the Guy and David know what we've been at the table with these talks for the past, like we were talking maybe about 3 or 4 years now. One of the things that is the big challenge is when they say, where do you locate these centers? Well, we did a study of what would be good location that would serve multiple large businesses. But then you have to have the building, and then you get into licensing. And I'm sure Heather can agree that licensing is a huge, huge challenge. We are all about safety, and we support all safety measures above and beyond. But there are things that at the licensing level that must change in order for people to be willing to go into childcare, because frankly, people leave the process because it is too stringent. And that's where policy can be looked at. And because we would always get, just like you say, up to the brink of, in our conversations with the large companies that we were speaking with. But then it's like, okay, but what is the next step? Well, the next step is finding a location, getting a building licensed, and the expense is astronomical. So that is where we need to go.
Yeah, these are state rules you're referring to.
These are state licensing.
Okay. Catherine, you have your hand up. You wanted to jump in?
Okay, there I am. I wanted to ask about something that came up for me as a parent, which was odd hours of childcare. And I wonder what showed up on the survey. And we do know that those workers doing odd hours, well, you know, there's Samson and the bigger companies, but there's also the parents out there that need to work at a restaurant or dishwashing and all of those other things. And I know that through the years, different childcare facilities have attempted to do the care, but it's difficult because they don't have the numbers and you know the hours are odd. Could you speak to that? Anyone?
We did look at that. That was part of the survey, and it did come back, especially for BP and Samson Rope, I do believe was the other one that had a lot of people that wanted out of hours care. We looked at it within our organization and we did table it because it is extremely expensive and extremely difficult, and also looking at what is best for the child. And so that will have to be readdressed if we do move forward into looking at facilities for childcare and operation hours for that community that does work. They have 24-hour shifts. So it is something that was recognized in all of the surveys. So it's out there, but the solution is not necessarily right at hand.
Catherine, one of the things that the Northwest Center is going to look at, because other childcare centers have stepped up in the past to try to do some irregular hour care, and the demand never materialized to make even getting close to the high cost of doing it. So that's the reason we don't have any. But we are going to work with the employers to see if there's a way, especially if you have an infant or a toddler, taking them even to a really well-run center in the middle of the night doesn't just typically feel good for parents. But if we could work with coworkers or families of coworkers in those businesses where they know each other already, get the coworkers, spouse or partners licensed as a licensed family home. We think there's some potential there to help meet some of the odd hour care needs, but there's both chronic scheduling, third shift kind of stuff, but there's also like during the turnarounds for the refineries, you've got employees working 15-hour shifts or longer sometimes for that process. So it's got to be very flexible, and it's hard to be flexible on a big scale. It's going to have to be just small providers who have, we think, some other link to that business to want to step up and do that, and have the confidence of the workers to put their children there.
Has there been any increase rather than providing childcare assistance through businesses? Has there been any increase in that recognition that, yeah, you don't want to take a toddler out at night, but helping to support the cost of bringing someone in?
That was a part of the surveying options, and there are businesses around the country that we bring those best practices to those conversations to say that that is one option for an employer, is to, as a part of their benefits package, provide some support for purchasing childcare by their employees. So we will keep all those options on the table.
Yeah, that was part of the dialogue in the consortium, and I think for me, the biggest factor limiting that as an option for us is the lack of capacity in our community. I mean, we can have employers offer that, but there's generally no place for them to go.
Does anyone else have either questions or comments or pleas or anything else for any of our speakers before we wrap up? If you want to just jump in, unmute, or use the chat to, or participants rather, to raise your hand. And any of our speakers, any last thoughts you want to share before we wrap up?
I think one of the pieces that we've touched on a little bit, and I think Heather and Melinda can certainly speak to it, but is the business case for these facilities themselves. For many of them in the community, they are businesses, they are for profit. The club and the Y are both nonprofit entities. And so it's just, a business has to be able to be profitable as well. And there's a lot of different nuanced dialogue that we've touched on most of today. And so I think when we're considering this, we need to consider the care for our families and employees, the care for our kids, the care for these centers, and then the long-term outlook that I mentioned earlier too.
Yeah. Okay. I want to thank, first and foremost, Carol Dukes with the Whatcom Democratic Women's Group, because she did the heavy lifting on getting this going and contacting a lot of people, and also Sandy Barolino for also working on this. And this has been, while very sobering, I think it's also, it gives me hope that the right people are working on this. And a little bit of what I'm hearing, having been enmeshed in this for, as I say, decades, is a little bit of a shift in attitude from the business community, perhaps, where it used to be they recognized it, businesses recognized it, a problem of my employees. Now they're starting to really recognize it's a problem for my business. And I hope that that is, that's a step in the right direction to making some of the changes and getting some of the financial support that's needed for the children of this country. So I thank all of our speakers for their time, the preparation that went into this, and we will make this recording available. And really, it's been a great learning experience, and I thank you all. Yeah. All right, we will let people know what we're doing, and I'm going to end the meeting. So, thank you all for coming.
YouTube link in the chat, so anybody that wanted to take a look at that U.S. Chamber Foundation video, it's in the chat, and then I also posted it to our Facebook page earlier this week. So
okay, Guy, thank you. I we'll get that around. That's, the chat does get recorded as part of the recording, so that's good. Again, thank you. Go out and enjoy the nice day now that the fog has finally started to clear. Take care.